Hello, geeks, gamers, and fellow hobbyists. I am Rob, here once more in my lair to regale you once more with the story of my ongoing campaign in the Warhammer 40K universe, focusing on our up-and-coming Adeptus Arbites. And we have gone over the introduction to the campaign and their first episode. Now we're going to cover several sessions at a time in varying levels of detail, mostly just the highlights for the most part, simply because months have gone by, my memory isn't that sharp, but I'll cover the important things. The group was in the Precinct Fortress, which had been mostly apparently abandoned and inoperative. But they had breached it, and they were going around to explore and see what kind of damage had been done so that they could get started on turning it back into a functional Precinct Fortress. If you hear me accidentally slip and say Chapter Fortress, that's where the Space Marines are based out of. The Precinct Fortress is where the Arbites are based out of, and they have a Precinct Fortress. It's a very nice Precinct Fortress. It's made of high-end technology. It's as old as the Hive is. It's big enough and has all of the amenities to do a lot of the things that they need. When it's in full operation, it is completely capable of covering the entire Hive that they're in, all 750 billion people that are in it. Able to house thousands of Adeptus Arbites and the tens of thousands of support staff to be self-sufficient with hydroponics and other means of producing the things that they need, full vehicle bays for their fleet of vehicles that they don't have yet, you know, all kinds of things, including a ground-to-orbit communicator. But, as of right now, they are in a broken Precinct Fortress that has very little power, mostly on storage because the reactor has not been ignited for some time. And as they're going through, they realize they're not alone. They explore through the interrogation section, where they are greeted with a chilling greeting, saying that they're being watched. They find a man defense fortress, point defense turret that has been set up in front of a turbolift. Rex, the guardsman turned Arbites, takes it out with his gun. He's very good. As they go on, however, they go through the interrogation level. They go without really being too careful. They trip an invisible security sensor. The area fills with poison gas, which is knockout variety, and they all eventually succumb to the effects. They wake up, they are strapped to interrogation tables. Not where you want to be in this universe, ever. And a figure comes into the room. He is wearing a duster. He is wearing a broad hat, not a wizard hat like I have, but a broad hat. He has I believe he has a bolt pistol, which is a powerful weapon. And he starts interrogating them and asking them what their business is. For the most part, they mostly give good answers. And it's funny, I'm going to say this a lot, but their assassin, Rainer, is again played by the youngest member, not a lot of experience, but he gives him lip. He asks what authority he has to be interrogating them. And the mysterious figure appreciates that kind of spark and enthusiasm. So, while the others give the correct answers, he gives the bold answer and gets a little bit more respect. I'm not going to say it always works out well for him, but sometimes he gets successes beyond what the kind of rote answers that some of the others tend to give can produce, which is fun. Sometimes it's horrible, but... So... he releases them, introduces himself as the Marshal, the last surviving member of the Adeptus Arbites on this planet, as far as he knew. All the others had been killed by various excesses. Corruption had set in, stupidity, and an inability to understand, where things had gone off the rails, as with a lack of drive from the Mechanicum, they very much turned insular, which let gangs and other things spring up in their wake, and the Arbites that were there ran the entire place under in 50 years. The entire thing had been absent and inert for about 40 years. So, over that 100 years, there was only 50 years that the Arbites were a drastic presence. The Marshal leaves the Precinct Fortress rarely. He's got plenty of food and supplies to keep him going, but he doesn't go out very often because he's but one man, whereas there's whole gangs and cults that are operating throughout the town. And that's just the immediate environs. He doesn't have the ability to go off into the more remote tech fiefdoms either. So they learn about the power structures in the area from the Marshal. They learn that the gang that is in control of the area around the Precinct Fortress is known as the Zoners. They are probably the nicest gang they'll ever deal with because their leader, Red Max, is a simple-minded fellow who believes in fairness, treating people well, and he is very religious. He believes in the Emperor. He believes that by emulating the Emperor and preserving the area under his control for the Imperium as best as he can, good things will happen. And so far, he hasn't been wrong. He's got a strong gang. He's been able to hold off any other contenders, and the people who are under him aren't rebellious. They're actually grateful to have a better life because they have a strong gang with reasonably honorable motives. And so, in the initial, they don't have this immediate worry that they're going to be laid siege to. It gives them a little bit of a calm in the storm. Don't worry, they won't get used to it. They also find out that the group that attacked them initially when they got off was an imperial murder cult called the Ophidian cult. Now, one of the things, just how dark the Imperium is they have legally sanctioned cults that specialize in killing people. These generally tend to breed their recruits for their Officio Assassinorum, which is the group of legal assassins that they send out to take out things that are a threat to the Imperium. Not basically the scalpel where the Imperial Guard and Imperial Navy would be your nuclear weapons. Sometimes it's possible to take care of a problem just with a quick, convenient death, and that's what the Officio Assassinorum is for. These murder cults feed that. So they aren't completely squashed, despite the fact that they sound horrible to us. This Ophidian cult they have a weird black and snake thing going on, but they are a group that believes in the perfect kill, and they engage primarily in hand-to-hand combat. Their assassins use primarily swords. Their recruits, however, have other nasty weapons, and their defensive fortresses and such, or their defense houses, have automated weapons and such. So they are a power in and of themselves, but mostly they are a bugaboo. Things parents threaten their children with when they're naughty. They are somewhat restrained, so they don't go randomly killing people. They kill people who are a challenge. And usually the kind of people that won't get them in trouble with a Mechanicum, because Mechanicum has the power to squash them if they want. But they don't want to. Helps to keep the population under control. So, as far as the Mechanicum is concerned, the Ophidian cult is fine. They never kill any member of the actual tech priest cult. So they figured that out, and they started making plans on where they could go. The Marshal decided he was going to be Batman. He is going to hide out, blend into the infrastructure, and drip feed them things that they can then act on so that they can strike intelligently against whatever madness pops up. And the group was fine with that. They didn't really want to deal with this senior officer who's a bit crazed from being in solitude for some 25 years. So he went off. he let the group have access to the... The problem is with a big part of the problem with the Precinct Fortress is most of it is locked away. The higher levels are completely locked down. They can't get up to the mid tier of the hive nor the top tier of the hive because they can't get out of their section of the fortress. They can't only go up to a certain level. So far they can get to the ground level, which has the access to the underground garage, so they can lift vehicles up if they get some. Machine bays, interrogation bays for first-time visitors. The next level up is incarceration and interrogation, and then beyond that is the barracks. That's as far as they can go. They've tried to go down with not good success. They know there are several levels of vaulting below the area they can access, the sub-basement, but they aren't quite ready for that, and they can't get up any further, which is where all of the better arsenal and armories are supposed to be located. Nope, they don't have access to that right now. What they did get is a couple of crates of shotguns, not the great combat shotguns, but just stock. Two shots and you're done. Not very efficient in a combat when there's lots of bullets flying. So, next session. The group decides they are going to go and pay a visit to the large bazaar that's only about a half-mile away. And they go incognito because they don't even have really much for uniforms. They don't have body armor, which the Adeptus Arbites always have. They don't have access to that yet. So they decide they have a little funds, and they have the resources that they have right now, which is a lot of food, more food than they'll ever need. Hundreds of years' worth of food at their current level. So they have some resources as a bargaining chip. So they go to the bazaar and look around and see what's going on. And the bazaar is very well stocked because the planet is almost overflowing with the supplies that they made that they haven't been able to offload. So they see a whole bunch of things that they should never normally see in an open-air market. They see components that have been accessed from production facilities, especially those from Magos Milorum, who handles military motive systems, drones, and point defenses and things like that. They found some like friend or foe indicators and a bunch of sensitive stuff that shouldn't have been out. So they tag that, but each step that they take through this campaign is basically a how hard do you want to be? How badly do you want to be, I am the law, and crush anybody who breaks the law in front of them? They have the opportunity. They haven't been taking that up. They decided to take a very soft approach and take a look and see what was available. Not so much, what needed stomping down. Also, they were looking for supplies because they desperately needed better armor. The Psyker, for example, had next to no armor. The Arbitrator had very poor armor. The best person had Guardsman armor, which is not fantastic on a grand scale of things, but infinitely better than what the others seem to have. So as they were going along, they got a taste of the combat. Every session so far there had been a little combat, not a huge amount. We were setting and framing the story. And this was not going to be any different. They could have had combat anytime they wanted it because they saw a number of rule breakers. If they decided to pop out and say, I am the law, they could have had combat aplenty. But they didn't. They decided they were going to go that approach, and I am, as a storyteller, not opposed to people skipping combat. They saw that the bazaar was patrolled by zoner enforcers, and they didn't see any egregious acts. They didn't see, open chaos artifact pushing, or it all seemed pretty much above the board. Different sections of the bazaar had different things, so they went around and explored. Primarily, however, they were interested in... I don't want to overstep myself here and drift off into a story that is farther than they have gotten. they found an interesting contact by blind chance. They weren't real subtle. Again, it's a game of specialization and being able to blend into an underhive, despite the fact that several of them were hivers, they tended to stick out. And with the big grunt guardsmen from the primal world, yeah. So they were basically trying to remember the circumstances. They saw some wrongdoing, and they found out that the person doing the wrongdoing was a shape changer. He was able to change forms. I believe it was the one who was selling the illegal bits. And he ran away and he changed forms to try to blend, but they saw him. And rather than immediately shoot him down or anything as a mutant, they tailed him. And they found basically the local crime lord, who was a member. His name is Gruner, and he helps to direct the organized crime in the area. Now, interesting thing before that happened, as they were tailing the shapeshifter, the arbitrator, Ryder, went after him. That's what he was like a hunting hound. Oddly enough, the assassin didn't want to get into that. He perhaps didn't feel like pulling his trigger finger, but he immediately yelled out, "I'll give 10 pounds of food to the person who takes that man down." Well, that got a mob, because food is very valuable. But Ryder took down the perpetrator first. And the group turns around and says, "Well, he's been apprehended. Where's our food?" And Ryder's like, "Oh, it's at the precinct fortress. You'll have to go there to get it," which they all know is a death trap. So they pulled out batons and they went to work on Raynor. And before the others could get in, which they did, he took a critical and had his arm physically knocked off with a baseball bat from a massive hit. Just perfect damage, and he had already been scuffed up a bit. And the blunt impact critical actually caused his arm to just get ripped off. I'm not sure physically if that's even possible, but it happened. Or it was so terribly damaged that it was not functional at all. So there were a couple of summary executions for daring to attack an arbitrator. So they got their first bit of "I am the law." They also carried one back for interrogation. I believe the one who actually did the damage. And they, for the most part, left feeling pretty good about things. When they met with Gruner is a businessman, first and foremost. He's not really a thug. And his patter was this: we take care of things. It's nothing on a scale that you arbitrators would have to worry about. But I'll tell you what, it actually benefits us to have, a certain element of law. Otherwise, crime doesn't work if there isn't a framework of law around which to fix the crime. So we'll give you a few things that you may need to get you on your feet and to help you out, which they immediately were nervous about, as selling your soul to the devil in a sort. But he gave them a cyber arm for the assassin, which is rather expensive. That would cost 1,000 thrones, which is the unit of currency that they didn't have. So they got him a new cybernetic arm. They also got a little weaponry, I believe, some basic armor, and they came out pretty good. Although now they kind of owe favors to organized crime, and that is another part of the choices that they get to make through the storyline. They seem to have a good terms with Gruner, and that's fine. I'm sure that nothing bad could happen as a result. Later on, they also get a visit from the Ministorum, the imperial cult, the religious order, and they are welcome to the neighborhood. And they are basically told that they will get help because the Ministorum is grateful to have the assistance of the Arbites in helping keep order. They're great at saving souls, but as far as keeping the order and everything, there's only so much they can do. So they're happy to see them, and they offer help. Everybody wants to help the Arbites, which to tie them down with obligations, fairly obviously. Also, Jippus, the tech priest, is a part of their order, so the tech priest GM NPC is replaced by the adept NPC, Iamus. So, they get to meet Abbot Shearing, who is a delightful fellow. Many of my members of the Ministorum on a street level generally tend to be loud and flamboyant. Abbot Shearing is loud and abrasive. He's not afraid to tell you that he doesn't care about people's lives as long as they serve the Emperor. And, his own opinions, for example, on child rearing is that if you spare on the beatings, then the child is basically handed over to the enemy. It's a different dynamic, and it's designed to really ramp up the rawness of the world to the nth degree. And that's how they ended that, after a nice meeting with the abbot. And they're told that Cardinal Ravenos will like to pay them a visit at some point. He was the one who sent him along. So, next session. They find out... yes, there's... Oh, yeah. They go out and about again. Because... I'm trying to remember. There's some reason that they go out away from the chapter precinct, and Fade, the Psyker, decides he wants to exercise his new flashbang power in front of the populace, who immediately attack them to destroy the witch amongst there. And even though he protests loudly, they end up having to shoot into the mob a bit. Nothing too terrible, but it is something that happens. They also end up fighting one of the nasty creatures called a Zephrix. It is... they find out that one of the more bored members of the Magos cast of the tech priests, one of their branches is the Order Biologus, which they constantly specialize in living things and constructs and modification and medicine. And he became kind of a monster creator in his spare time, and as a result, there's a great number of mutant and radiated creatures in the Underhive that are his former playthings. To this point, they still don't know what happened to that Nagus. They end up fighting a bunch of scavengers. I can't remember the circumstances. And they end up taking down a tech drone. I believe they were lured out of the base because they were receiving some sort of a bootleg signal that did not make them very pleased. They went to investigate. But at any rate, the next session, that session ended without any further major injuries to my knowledge. Raynor kind of starts going on a cycle here where he's constantly injured. There's no magical healing that everything goes away. Even the Psyker's healing ability only goes so far. And he kind of invites getting beaten up. He was at critical for a while, and he was starting to mend, and he gets shot, and he goes down a few pegs, and he's constantly flirting with critical damage. But they generally try to keep him healed up enough so that he can follow and help them. Ostensibly, he is the guy with a gun and should be behind all the others to stay mostly out of danger. So then they finally get their first real Arbites mission. They get word that there is going to be an assassination attempt against a leader of one of these tech fiefdoms, Magos Stephanos, who directly has a hand in servitor construction. Some of his servitors are some of the finest there are, and they generally have a military bent. They are the big combat destroyers that are the most violent criminals, people whose propensity is to dealing with a situation is to attack and be violent, and that's cranked up to the nth degree. They're given some limited controlling systems and a lot of really big scary weaponry and some armor plating and sent off to fight. That's Stephanos' trade. And all of his staff and everything that he has make sure that one of the biggest exports of this planet are fine-grade combat servitors. He's got them stacked to the roof. Somebody wants to kill him. The group finds out about it. So they contact him and tell him that they want to do investigation because killing off a state head is something that is within the grounds of the Arbites to deal with. You see somebody kill somebody else in the street as murder? Yeah, as an arbiter, you can interject if you want, or you can leave it for the planet-side law enforcement to take care of. But things that are involving, something that could drastically shake up the status quo, yeah, they wanted to go and find out about that. So they go to Magos Stephanos' tech fiefdom by a shuttle. They had crowded into an already full cargo shuttle, and they just don't have the resources at this time to do a great deal. At one point they had a buggy, which was kind of nice, but it got blown up. That was what happened in the prior session. They tried to get out and it got exploded. I believe rocket fire took it down. Something they've been having problems with. So they go to their transport is actually accommodated by the Administratum because Yamas arranges it, but because that's not the primary purpose of the shuttle, yeah, it's a little crowded. And it ends up taking them to an Administratum data cache, a big, huge warehouse where massive amounts of files are stored. They take care of all of the paperwork of this tech fiefdom. Interesting thing, the Mechanicum doesn't take care of their own stuff. They do rely on the Administratum to do a lot of the bookkeeping and such. That's what they're good at. Unfortunately, it's incredibly inefficient. In this time, it's a kind of a dark age. They don't have reliable computers like we do. So, yep, scribes, quills, parchment, candlelight, on top of barely functioning computers and such. So everything is kept on paperwork and triplicate. Oh. It's a nightmare thinking about today, but that's their reality. So they get to this this place. They explore the immediate environs, and they run afoul of some airborne snakes, soar snakes they're called. And they have a hydrogen balloon, a natural organic balloon inside of them that they produce that allows them to float, and they can propel themselves. So they were attacked. Fade throughout his flashbang, which he's dearly loving at this point, and they mopped up the snakes without too much of a problem, even though the things were fairly venomous. And they end up meeting with Magos Stephanos, who is very personable. Many of the Magoses, as they get more and more of their meaty bits chopped off and replaced with machines, have a harder time relating to other people. They understand machines, and that's all they care about. Magos Stephanos is a bit different. He is an eccentric as far as the others are concerned. He knows how to still be polite. He knows how to be gracious. And he gives them basically the run of the place, as is their due. So they start doing the investigating thing. Now, I'm not going to go through all the steps, unfortunately. It was a fun story, and the guys did an excellent job of probing and talking to people and interrogating and thinking ahead about what could happen, and then making moves against what could happen and cutting off. They found several different plots against the Magos. They found out about an assassination from a sniper that they took care of. They found out that several of the tech priests had been suborned by having chips that would have caused them to fuzz out and do things that would have put the demise of the Magos into order. They even found out that they had a large crane with a payload that was full of very, very nasty toxins suitable for use in chemical warfare that they were going to drop on him from above while he was making this speech that he was supposed to have planned. They had suborned heavy-duty combat servitors, the big ones, the ones that go up against tanks, to go and take him out. Number of different avenues. And every time they did, they either turned it away and fixed the problem, or they found a clue and either it clicked and they got a little closer to the truth, or they passed it by, which is common in an investigation scenario. Sometimes you don't get the import, or you think that something is a red herring that might not be. What they eventually found out were that all of the orders were delivered in burst from an orbital transport from the defense station, kind of a way. Their orbital station is a point that ships can come, load up, and fly off without having to go into the atmosphere. It's also a place where the defense of the planet would take place primarily. If it got to the planet, it would get really ugly. So there are a number of these stations, and all these orders came from one station, and they found out that it would only be an incredibly high-ranking person who could do all of these things. The list of suspects dwindles drastically, eventually coming down to only a few actual Magoses having the resources and the security clearance to be able to do these things. A couple of them were leaders of their own tech fiefdoms. One of them was Magos Stephanos. They found out there was one other order that had not been fulfilled. So they went, and it would take. There were two orders that had not been fulfilled. They would take place in the home of the Magos himself. So they went to his mansion, and one of them was set to turn the fusion reactor in his basement critical, which would have killed everything in a few kilometers radius. Drastic, crude, but effective. The other one, the one they fixed that right away. Then they went on to find out what the last one was. It was to turn his recaf, their coffee, his recaf machine to create a brew at the perfect temperature. They got to the kitchen. They looked. They're like, maybe it's set to blow up and kill the Magos. And they're like, well, it's set here to... and the Magos comes sweeping in and says, to make a cup of recaf at exactly this temperature, the perfect temperature to enjoy. And they're all like, arrrr? And eventually, and he's like, oh, I trust that you're hard at work. And at first they're like, yeah, well, we've got the list narrowed down to just a few people. And they threw out a few names, and he's like, no, there's no chance of that. I'm telling you, there's no chance of that. You need to look elsewhere. And finally, Ryder says, or, of course, this entire thing could have been an elaborate test that you set up to bring us to this point so we could confront it and confirm to you that we know what we're doing. And he's like, I'm impressed. Very well. You are truly not just bottom feeders who are sent here to put a brave face on things. And you are somebody that we should pay attention to and take lead of. So I'll tell you what. Congratulations. Yes, I set everything up myself to test you. Had you failed at any of them, I would have stopped it, but yeah, you did a good job. Now, I will give you superior armor. So he gave them all good flak armor. And I will give you some weaponry. And I will give you a flying craft that you can use to get around the Underhive. It's a rotor craft, 4 rotors. Kind of like a huge version of a drone, but it's got a big enough armored compartment that can hold all of them. It has a couple of machine guns, the heavy stubbers on the side, so they have some firepower. And the entire thing can be driven by a servitor who's implanted into the cockpit. So they don't have to have their own pilot. They can do it all themselves. So, despite the fact that I believe Rex is quite good at piloting just about anything, he's really been developing those piloting skills. So they left, and they were pretty happy with things. They weren't too mad that I'd swerved them all with what is kind of a classic, but I couldn't resist. It was fun. Then they decided, then they got paid. That was an important thing. The next session was a shopping trip, which is good because several members could not make it. It was just Ryder, Fade, and Rex. Jippus couldn't make it, and the player of Raynor was naughty and wasn't able to make it. So they went shopping. They had money. They had goods. So they went out and made some friends. First of all, they found out about the Sharp family, who is a family that have been in the weapon selling business for a long time. They were selling homemade weaponry back in the day, but there's so much excess lying around that they actually sell really good stuff. They have people who have been learning the trade over generations, and they can make street-level weapons like hand cannons and auto pistols and auto guns and things at good to excellent quality. This is good for the players because they wanted to upgrade their weaponry from the stock stuff they had, and they did. They got combat shotguns that are capable of semi-automatic fire. They got the Psyker got a double-shot hand cannon that is a frightening weapon when he can hit with it. They met up with the Sharps were a good contact for them to fill all of their weapon-related needs. They also found Beauregard's, who is a deserter from the Guard, but he has a lot of Guard surplus. He's kind of a cantankerous old fellow, but he has 100 different flavors of low stick, which the Psyker is addicted to. Low sticks. That's their cigarette, but it has a mild narcotic in it, so it's a ramped up cigarette. And they found that one of the cousins of the Sharps is into modifications, and he helped them out by adding little bits and bobs to the weaponry that makes it, they're pretty well kitted out now. They probably want better armor. They want to go up to Carapace. They're not quite there yet. They have a riot shield with a shock wave generator on it. They've got some decent toys. That ended that session. Next session, everybody was there. So there was a little bit of retrograde as some of the people who missed out grabbed a few things that they would have gotten from the Sharps and etc. I believe Jippus got an upgraded OmnusI, which is a Swiss Army knife, but they're invaluable to tech priests for all things tech use. Then they were leaving and saw that they were in incognito. They were wearing commoner's clothes. They weren't wearing their heavy armor except for Rex, who always wears his armor. He was wearing his guardsman armor, though, so it's a little bit less arbutus. And they saw this very attractive woman in a bodysuit running away from several members who looked like they were of the Ophidian cult. So, they intervened. Hardcore. Attacking the cultists. They killed one... One got away. They killed two. And they got hurt for their trouble. These guys were good warriors, and they didn't take no well. So they fought back, and Ryder got drilled through. He was critically injured. The combat is pretty brutal. You can have lasting injuries, which requires the need of cybernetics and things. But a good shot can send you to the floor pretty quickly. And he was knocked out, and there were some other injuries. But they ended up winning. And they took the bodies and their fallen off to basically a chop shop, a medical facility, street level. And the lady that they had rescued, they had intervened for, talked to them. She's a noble, or Lady Estrella. And she told them, I'll cover all the costs of fixing your friends up. This person is very good. He's brilliant with Medicae. and which is medicine skills. There's a pseudo-Latin overlay for a lot of the things in the game, in case you haven't figured that out yet. And got them taken care of. They limped back to the precinct fortress in a garbage chariot, but got back safely because the Ophidian cult had studded the way back with snipers who were looking to take them out. They're not being subtle anymore. Kid gloves are pretty well off. The group got back to the chapter fortress and went underground. We're getting close to the end here. The group then found out about a meetup of several of the local gangs and decided it would be a good idea to crash the party. So they went in on their flyer. They found out that members of, first of all, the Zoners were going to be there. They found out that neighboring groups of the Reavers, the Tollmen, and the Gornikai were also going to be there. So, decided to introduce themselves. They showed up, badass, and just, we're the Adeptus Arbitus. Keep your nose clean, we won't have to kick it in. As long as you guys are on the relatively straight and narrow, don't trade in stuff that's not allowed, don't take the lives of people too cheaply, because they're the Emperor's currency, we won't have a problem. We'll stay out of your business. We don't care that you exist as gangs. It's not what we're here for. And they left. But as they left, they were attacked. There was a fire team that had a rocket launcher that directly attacked their craft as they were taking off. And there was a psyker, a rogue witch. Turns out these were cultists of chaos, the bad stuff. So they were attacked that way, and then as they were reeling and getting ready to return fire against the rocket team, the cockpit all of a sudden filled with witch fire. Most of the group was okay, but they got a little burned and really panicked. And the assassin is like, "Get us out of here!" to the servitor. But there are buildings. I don't care. Fly straight ahead. Okay. Crash, crash, crash. Their crafts are going through buildings. Most of these buildings are made of reclaimed material, so they didn't protest too much. The people inside probably would, though. But then, as the interchange between the two psychers were starting to take place, remember how I said that every once in a while something truly bad happens when you contact the powers of the warp? Well, the evil psyker, the cultist, got a bad ending and caused mass demon possession for people around him, including the arbitrators. They were wrestling with demons that were trying to control their mind and get into the real world. They resisted for the most part. Mostly. I believe Raynor, I think, might have missed his will roll, if I'm right. I might not be, but one of the members was affected. Not in such a... where he was just basically on the ground thrashing and speaking in odd tongues. The rest of the group held their crap together enough to get the craft out of the direct beeline towards the pillar that they were flying towards, since the servitor was a little wonky from rocket fire. And they... along the way, I have a policy, and I long have, where if somebody has a birthday during the game, I don't give them a physical present because I'm poor. A little cheap, but mostly I'm poor. So what I do is I give their character something neat that they find or given or something like that. Raynor, the assassin, he has a cybernetic arm, so he got an upgrade to his arm. It's basically a keypad that causes different things to happen. But much like if you ever saw the classic show, The Greatest American Hero, he's a little bit like that. He's got something really cool, but he has no instructions for it. So he keeps playing with it and trying to figure out what it does. That sometimes is good, sometimes not. Like when he tried and his arm just fell off, because it was connected to his shoulder with a cable. So he was still kind of able to control it, but it grabbed onto a building and almost dragged him out to his death. Various hilarious things can happen with it. Well, during the flying and everything, unfortunately, the Psyker was pitched out of the craft, and he went flying through a church, and he had to burn a fate point, which is a mechanic that you can use to save your life against what otherwise would be certain death. And his spine was basically pulped as he smashed into the pulpit. The preacher turned that into a really good sermon, however. So, this last session, they scraped him off of the altar, flew back to the chapter precinct, the precinct fortress, I'll get it right eventually, and fixed him up. He mostly fixed himself up after the anesthetic, which was a bottle of Amasec shoved up his... let's just say he wasn't feeling any pain. He actually... as a DM, I took Fiat, and I'm like, he has a power of healing. The Emperor steps in and said, "You are not to be a vegetable this day," and all of a sudden, you feel great. Unfortunately, they have a wonky medical servitor who is a little aggressive. And again, remember, servitors are people that have been lobotomized and extra add-ons attached. So it's kind of scary when it goes crazy. It's stalking him right now until Ryder turned it off, but otherwise it was stalking him as a refugee from the infirmary. Trying to remember the reason they... Once again, they left the familiar confines of the precinct fortress, and while skulking around an alley, they ended up running afoul of what looks like a giant 6-foot-tall rat with psyker abilities and scything blade tentacles coming out of its side. Another one of these mutant creatures, called an Eidolon rat. And they shredded it with bullets and las fire. And now we're at the point where memory is really failing me. The biggest thing that I remember was they were invited to meet up with a street preacher who could really help them connect with the Adeptus Ministorum. And he was a very vitriolic street preacher named Brother Florio, and they made a favorable impression on him as pious members of the infrastructure of the Imperium, and things look like they're going pretty well for the most part. If Raynor doesn't end up killing himself through various misdeeds, it'll be amazing. He always seems to get injured, and if somebody needs to push that button that nobody knows what the button does, he'll do it. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Ryder seems to be that long-suffering sergeant who has to put up with the misdeeds of his group. Thade seems to have no compunction about using his power at the drop of a hat, which can sometimes lead to bad things happening, because the powers have drawbacks. Like I said, Raynor's a bit whimsical. Jippus is competent, always looking to add his intelligence and his skills to the group. And of course, Rex. Rex also just shakes his head at a lot of what these hivers are doing. And he just is kind of stoic and competent at some of the core skills the group still needs from time to time. He's kind of like the ultimate backup. He's very solid at combat, but he's also diversified into a lot of other things that the group really has come to rely on. The thing is, he's staying away almost superstitiously from all the tech stuff that everybody else is so enamored with, which really makes him stand out in this world. That catches you up without going into the small details that you've come to expect. This has been a very long video already. But that has been all the way up unto the very last day of May, the 31st. So when we play tonight, the 14th, it will be Warhammer 40K going forward with hopefully regular and routine states of the dungeon with more detail, like you like. If any of my players see this and they want to memorialize deeds or misdeeds that happened along the way that I glossed over because of the nature of this, feel free to fill in the comments. Gentlemen, you have keyboards, you know how to use them, and if you want any of this stuff kept for posterity's sake, like I said, I know there's lots of things like Raynor's battles with an abbot in the halls of the precinct fortress, or the flood of kids that are now infesting the place. We'll get into that, but this is just a quick sum up. So, I will see you all next time. I am Rob. This is my State of the Dungeon address here in the lair of OmnusI. Thank you for watching. Farewell, and may you have any safe adventures.